my Govanen, one and all, travelers along this road that goes ever on, welcome to the Literary Baptists. I'm Lee, and I'm joined as always by my friends and co-hosts, Maddie, Nick, and Zach. How are you all doing this evening?
Hey, good to be here.
All right, pipe down, old man.
That was enthusiastic.
I'm trying to get my time in.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Grandpa drank too much coffee this afternoon. He's all wired now.
Grandpa, I guess I am the oldest, huh?
He's ready to get through this and go watch the football.
It ain't all night. I guess it is. There's Thursday night football.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't watch it. I read books. Anyway, speaking of reading books, before we dive into this chapter of the Silmarillion, let's go around the table here and what have you guys been reading lately? What's been capturing your imagination?
Well, I just finished Boethius yesterday.
Is that how we say his name?
That's how I said it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea how it's pronounced.
How are you trying to pronounce it?
Boethius.
Boethius. Probably manageable.
I don't know.
But yeah, I finished Boethius last night after losing the book for like 6 weeks. So I'm glad that I found it, finished it. Currently reading Beowulf, which I absolutely love. Like, absolutely love
now,
that.
Are you reading the Tolkien translation?
No, but I would like to.
Next read.
I like it so much that I would probably buy like pretty much every translation just to read it.
Are you reading the Haney translation?
No, of course I'm a failure because I don't have the translation. It starts with an R. I'll have to look it up. It's all the way in the other room, and I don't remember, and I'll probably say it wrong.
That sounds familiar because I have a copy. Is that a small white book?
Yeah.
I think I might have the same copy because that sounds really familiar.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to. I don't know if I'll find it, but I picked it up at a book bazaar, and we actually encountered that in our history for my kids. We're doing homeschool, and so I was like, you know what, we'll just read it because I never got to read it growing up, and I'm just loving it. Like, it makes me so happy. So much fun to read about it, and so much of what I've read recently, and even Tolkien's work and Lewis's work, are very influenced really by both, but Beowulf, and having just finished Dracula not that long ago, there's kind of elements from even Beowulf in Dracula. So yeah, that's mostly what I'm reading right now. And this book, obviously.
Yeah, of course, the Silmarillion too. Nicholas, what's on your docket?
I am reading very slowly. The short stories of Cordwainer Smith, who was a science fiction author, wrote back in like the 50s and 60s. I think he wrote the manual for the United States on psychological warfare, but then just in his spare time, he was a science fiction writer. So
that's awesome.
And he might have been, I think he was a Catholic too. He's a weird dude, but his science fiction is really interesting.
What's his name again?
Read Cordwainer Smith. That's his name. I forget what his real name is, but it's the one I read was, I think, kind of against feminism. It's like in the story, there's a planet where the women die just unexpectedly, and so the women like transform themselves into men and gain characteristics of men, and the society is considered it, and he calls it like subhuman, because there are just men in this society. And it's very interesting because it's written in the 60s, but it kind of deals with issues that we are dealing with today. And in the end, cats save the day, which is an interesting thing too. I knew you'd like that, Lee.
Yeah.
The cats are the saviors in this. It's a very weird story.
Meow.
Yeah. I think it's called the Commander Suzdal is the story. But I'm also reading Christopher Lash's The Revolt of the Elites and Betrayal of Democracy, which is a nonfiction book. And it's just kind of a series of essays on how elites have kind of taken over institutions, and they're the ones who are subverting what was the original American idea. And it's not like the nasty people, the lower classes that are revolting and changing things. It's actually the upper class folks. So both very interesting books.
Is that what you're reading, Zach? Are you reading at the same time with Nick?
No, I don't. I'm not reading
At all.
I started Dracula because of peer pressure. I'm gonna work on finishing Dracula in the near future, and of course the Silmarillion. But I don't have a. I'm kind of in between. In the series from the Cradle series from Will White, it's kind of like Final Fantasy meets Dragon Ball Z kind of a vibe to it, where everybody's trying to level up. It's kind of weird, interesting, but I've got to finish Brandon's Skyward book 3, part of the way through that.
What's it called? Skyward?
It's his Skyward series. I don't remember if that's the exact title. I don't have the book in front of me. But he's got several series that are all ongoing.
Is that within the Cosmere, or is that prior to the Cosmere?
I don't think that one is. I think that one's outside the Cosmere.
You're right, Skyward. I'm looking it up right now.
That one's a sci-fi kind of.
The
Interesting.
internet has classified it as young adult.
Yeah, that's me. So. I fall into that category.
Happy for
I just
you.
read it because I'm a Sanderson fanboy. So, I've loved everything he's written.
Yeah, you had socially pressured me into trying to restart Way of Kings for the third time. I have not yet succumbed to that peer pressure. However, I did fall prey to the same peer pressure to read Dracula that you fell under as well. Almost as if I was bitten by a vampire. I am mid-change. I'm about 60% way through the novel right now. I hit a dry spell. Nick's gonna kill me, but over the last couple weeks, I've been back on a contemporary poetry binge, and I have the I have the collected works of Charles Wright, who's one of my favorite of the living poets. He's a former poet laureate. I've enjoyed his stuff. It's obviously it's not rhyming, it's not fitting any form, but I enjoy kind of
so
the
postmodern garbage.
You would qualify it as postmodern garbage.
Okay.
However, it's very imagistic, which is something I enjoy. I enjoyed the imagist poets anyway, and so it tickles my fancy, at least on that side. So I've been reading that as well. So that was kind of my procrastination from finishing Dracula, was contemporary poetry. So sorry to disappoint.
You did.
Yeah. That's definitely disappointment.
Hey, I could have lied and said I read something else. So I didn't lie. I confessed.
Okay. I guess honesty is a good policy, they say.
However, I have the collected works of John Donne, and I'm really hoping to tear into that this winter.
Much better.
I'm very excited about that. I first read his work in high school English, and really enjoyed, even though I didn't quite get it at the time, but my brain has now grown up, and I definitely appreciate him a lot more than I used to. So I'm excited to dive into that this fall. So, or winter, I guess I should say. All right. Well, so we are discussing tonight the chapter of the beginning of days, which is the first chapter of the Quenta Silmarillion. So we finished the Vala Quenta last time. Over the course of the discussion so far, there's been a lot of discord among the Valar against Morgoth, or Melkor, as he's still known at this point, or Melkor the Morgoth, which I really like. And we still see more of that here, except that we begin to see more of the work of the Valar in Middle Earth coming to fruition. So we're seeing a lot of growing things happening in this chapter. Mosses and trees and all sorts of things are growing. The children of Iluvatar still have not yet woken up, but there's still more rage to come from Melkor, and so we see him do quite a few depraved acts of destruction in this chapter, and we'll talk a bit about that too. So, kind of more of the same, but the full the song of the Ainur is coming more and more into fruition at this point, unabated, even though they are a bit harried by the acts of Morgoth. So. I have to say, at the start of the chapter here, I was very happy for Zach, because his boy Tutus gets a shout out at the very beginning of this chapter.
So exciting! It's so good. I love him.
Can you? I know this isn't something we talked about previously, but as I was rereading the chapter tonight, I was very taken by the fact that we've gotten another reference to Melkor not only hating but fearing Tulkas's laughter, almost more than anything else, right? Because Tulkas is very strong, right? He's inclined to dealing with conflict. You know, he's a fighter, he's a brawler, but he laughs. And so one of the things I underlined was hearing in the far heaven that there was battle in the little kingdom, and Arda was filled with the sound of his laughter, Tulkas's laughter. So came Tulkas the strong, whose anger passes like a mighty wind, scattering cloud and darkness before it. And Melkor fled before his wrath and his laughter, and forsook Arda, and there was peace for a long age. I think it's super interesting that he would hate the laughter so much. And the might, of course.
I mean, he hates anything that has joy and beauty, and laughter is one of those things. You don't usually laugh from a place of anger or fear. I mean, there's some nervous laughter or maniacal laughter, I guess, but this is more a joyful, like he's obviously enjoying himself, right? Like, hey, I heard there was a battle. Yeah, whoa! I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's laughter is humbling.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you laugh at someone who thinks very highly of themselves, you know, that can help bring them down pretty quick. It can attack their pride in a way. And I mean, that's why things like memes can help, you know, shift people's thoughts on something, is because you mock things that are kind of dumb. And Melkor's, I mean, he sees himself as the highest being when he's clearly created. So mocking that and laughing at it is kind of a proper response, really.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a Psalm 2 vibe there. Like,
agreed.
He who sits in the heavens laughs. Like, I'm not worried about you here.
Yeah, it's a confident and triumphant laugh.
Yeah.
It's not a nervous laugh of like, we get nervous and instead of cringing, we laugh instead. No, it's like a laugh of assurance. Like Tukas knows he's going to take the day when it comes to the battle here, and he does. Right. And so there's I guess like a holy assuredness to it, that to quote a hymn, whatever the Lord ordains is right, and we can trust that not only God will do what is right, and He will win as well. And so I think that kind of impulse to laugh at the futile works of the enemy, I think I can see that in this tale and see the truth of that played out in the Christian life too. We should be joyful, and I think a little laughter at the silly works of darkness is not unwarranted at times.
Absolutely. Laugh in his face, man.
Works for me. So we have a big constructive act that begins the chapter here. So I think the power couple of the Valar, Aule and Yavanna, as far as like creative forces go, obviously people will say that Manwë and I always want to call her Elbereth, so I just always do. They're definitely the most powerful of the Valar, right? But as far as making things and like the craft of creation, it doesn't get more powerful than Aule and Yavanna. So Aule, at the prayer of Yavanna, wrought 2 mighty lamps for the lighting of Middle Earth, which he had built amid the encircling seas. Then Varda filled the lamps, and Manwë hallowed them, and the Valar set them upon high pillars, more lofty far than are any mountains of the later days. So we're kind of getting to the part in the creation story where creation is lit. Like, this is going so slow. God beat these guys on the time frame for sure.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because it seemed from the chapter that they created the lights because they had at this point subdued Melkor. He fled, and so the fires and things that he had raging out of control, they bring those under control, and all of a sudden there's no light. So hey guys, we need some light now that we have the fires put out. I thought that was pretty weird.
That's an interesting point though, because Melkor's fires are wrathful and really like uncontrolled. Like this is like the light that comes out of an erupting volcano or something, or a wildfire, right? Those are very ominous lights. And here, it's not only, these lamps aren't just lighting creation; these are contained and predictable, constructive lights, and they're going to be regular as well. So they're going to be dependable. Whereas those wrathful lights and burnings are destructive, as is with everything that Morgoth does, right? Destructive in one way or another.
What I thought was super interesting about this part was just the involvement of the 4. Like you read, you had Aule and Yavanna and Manwë and Varda all kind of doing their own contribution to the lamps. And even Aule making the lamps was at the prayer of his wife, requesting that. And there seems to be a little bit of a correlation of the light being necessary for her to do what she does,
right,
with her seeds and stuff like that. So there's that element there. The second thing that I thought, of course, having just read Narnia with my kids, is here's a lamp. C.S. Lewis obviously is it's much more famous for having the lamp in Narnia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that got me to kind of, I was like, I wonder why they both had lamps in their stories of like all the things, I guess. And I don't know if Tolkien's lamps are kind of the same, but I did look it up, and Lewis and Tolkien both were in, they say Malvern College, and it's like a town there in England, and they're known for having these gas lamps that lit the streets.
Oh.
And Lewis is recorded as saying that would be really neat to put that in a story. And I don't know if that was where Tolkien got it from or not, but it's kind of an interesting correlation where we see a lot of parallels in their stories. They obviously use them differently because the lamp in Narnia doesn't have the same function. But it's really neat to, I don't know, connect the two there, and that they're both looking at these lamps. And if you like Google it or YouTube it, you can see there's still some of these historic gas lamps around. And I'm curious if that's part of why he put the lamps in here.
I listened to a really, go ahead, Nick.
Oh, it's a good point that this town has beautiful gas street lamps, because here, at least, if I go outside and look at some of the street lamps here, they're just atrocious. They're, like a stick with like an LED lamp at the top. They're ugly. But if he's basing these on the lamps, these gas lamps that are in England at the time, they're probably quite beautiful lamps, something that you could admire, which I don't ever see. I just see unadmirable lamps. So I think that is something that's important to think about, that these aren't ugly street lamps that you'd find in a parking lot at Walmart.
And we're not used to seeing gas lamps. Like, they have a flickering flame in them, and later it's, that when they're, spoiler, they're knocked down and the flame falls out. Like, the gas lamps are actually really kind of mesmerizing to look at because they have that flicker of the flame, where now we just have light bulbs. So very exciting. But it is convenient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we traded beauty for convenience.
That's right.
Well, so Maddie, you gave us a spoiler alert, but I want to actually go ahead and just kind of fast forward to that. So, so we've got the lamps. They're special enough that they actually get names. So one is named Iluin and the other is named Ormal. One's in the north, one's in the south. And they're kind of shining at different times. And things are growing up because of their light. Beasts come forth and live in the grassy plains. And things are good. And of course, that's when Morgoth comes in to ruin everything. One of the lines I really loved talking about this is talking about Melkor, and he says, "In seeing now his time, he drew near again to Arda and looked down upon it, and the beauty of the earth in its spring filled him the more with hate." Mm-hmm. That's such a good line. And so he comes and he destroys the lamps.
So filled with hate because he can't make anything beautiful himself.
Yeah. That's kind of the constant theme for him is that evil isn't creative. It has to corrupt something that's already in existence, either destroy it or twist it for his own ends.
What you just said made me think of how just a few lines before that it says that he's talking about the spirits of the halls of Ea that he perverted to his service. I just really liked that word choice for perverted, because that's what he does. He corrupts, he perverts, he just makes ill use of what should have been good.
I thought that was really strange that he had spies among them, just living with them in the light and in the happiness and in the joy of what they were building there, and they remained somehow in his thrall. Like that's kind of odd to me, but like
he had little Judases at the feast. right?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what the Valar were up to when this happens.
Yeah.
They're sitting down and they're having a great celebratory feast that Manwë ordered, and so they were having a great time. Of course, Ale and Tulkas got pretty tired for all they were doing, but in that weakness, that was when Melkor chose to strike. And I think there's something I just think it's interesting, and it'll happen again. Another spoiler alert, but at a time when the Valar are sort of resting from their labors and kind of celebrating what's being done, that's when he chooses to spring upon them in attack. And like I said, it'll happen again, but I think there's something behind that, some sort of truth behind that as well. A little folding of the hands, right?
Complacency.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what plagues so much of, Christians in America, for example, is that we've been so comfortable for so long, and we're super blessed with all the, truly wealth and prosperity that we have in America comparatively, and it's really put us at risk because we're unguarded. As a whole, American evangelicals are extremely unguarded, and there's something about kind of that when you're having a good time, like you just kind of feel like there's nothing in the world that could hurt you, and it does seem, at least experientially, that's kind of like when the hits really come because you're kind of blindsided by it.
No, I definitely, I think you're onto something. I see a lot of parallels there. One of the things that I appreciate about the life of a Christian, especially, I guess, coming from my corner of the world as a Reformed Baptist, right, is we get a day of rest every week, and that's not it's not that we're necessarily like being complacent during that time, where it's ordained to rest, but there is a purpose for that. We're going on from that to more labors that the Lord has called us to in our own vocations, in our personal worship, our family devotions, all these kinds of things, and we get to rest and refuel on the Lord's day. And I think in doing that, in taking that periodic rest, one day in 7, I think we're better equipped, not only to handle kind of the slings and arrows, to borrow from Shakespeare, that get thrown our way by the enemy, but also to stave off this desire to sit back, relax, and take it easy, because we do get that taste of rest every week. We're not working ourselves down to the bone. We get the natural rhythm of the redeemed life of work. 6 days we'll work, and on the seventh, on the seventh day we rest. But for the Lord's day, on the first day of the week, we rest as the final fulfillment of that Sabbath. So I don't know. That rhythm. The more that I've gotten into that as a Christian in recent years, and further reforming, has been, I think, incredibly helpful, and spurred me on as a Christian to not be weary in doing good. So I say all that to say I love the Sabbath.
Amen.
Amen.
And it's certainly not like the wedding party that they were having with Tulkas and Nessa. So it's a little bit different, but in the same way, it's kind of like a wedding.
Yeah,
I guess. I think too, like in an inverse way, this story also points out that, Melkor, like Satan, doesn't follow any, Geneva conventions. Like he takes advantage of whatever, weakness or opportunity he can. He's not like, oh, I'll just let him rest for a little while. So Tolkien does a good job of really understanding evil which a lot of modern writers don't. So many people want to give like this, alternate view of maybe why the villains are really just victims. But no, Melkor is really just, he's evil and he hates all that is good.
There's a great C.S. Lewis quote that kind of reminded me of, where he talks about fantasy is when people wear their insides on the outside. And I think that is such a simple, clear explanation of some of the things we love about fantasy, because Morgoth here, of course, it helps that he's a spiritual being. He's not just a person like us, but he gets to wear that evil heart on the outside, where I'm sure if a postmodern writer were writing Melkor, they would humanize him and they would put some mitigating factors in there to try to make us identify with him a little more. My problem is I still find myself identifying with him sometimes in his evil, right? Because of my proclivity to sin, but he gets to wear that kind of pure evil on the outside and really be the standard bearer for ultimate evil. And I think that helps clear up so many things, not only in the Silmarillion, but carrying that same topic through into even the Lord of the Rings, where Sauron kind of takes up that mantle literally, and wears it. So yeah, I think that's one of the things I really find interesting about Tolkien and Lewis, is that very clear wearing the insides on the outside. And that's plain here with just the utter destruction of these lamps. So Melkor comes through and just knocks them over. And I guess something interesting that I thought, and I guess I wanted to ask the group, when they're destroyed, it says, and when the lamps were spilled, destroying flame was poured out over the earth, and the shape of Arda and the symmetry of its waters and its lands was marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. Why do you think the destruction of these two lamps on these tall pillars had such an outsized effect on the entire creation, the entire realm of Arda?
The first thing that occurred to me is just sheer size of them. Right, they're taller than more lofty far than any mountains of the later days, and they had to be enormous, right, to be able to shine light from one end of Middle Earth to the other. So just from sheer size, something like that being destroyed is going to have a real impact.
Yeah, just on a practical side, yeah, having that massive thing come down, and another aspect of that, just on sort of a physics standpoint too. At this time, Arda is a flat Earth. So the Earth is changed to a sphere later in history, but at this time, Arda is a flat planet, and so yeah, you're right. Two light lamps of this size would definitely have an outsized impact on a flat surface rather than a round one. I wondered, as I was reading it, and part of why I asked the question was I wondered if the intent of Morgoth created some of the outsized impact, because it is his intent to break what the Valar have made. That almost like not only did he destroy them, but he got them pushed over extra hard, so they made even more impact on the ground and created cracks that weren't intended to be there and couldn't be fixed. I don't know. It almost like he could put his rage into that destructive act and make it even more destructive than it may have naturally been. And I've got no textual support for that. It just made me think.
One of the things it talks about the symmetry of the waters ahead of time. That's one of the things that was destroyed by the lamps being destroyed. And it reminds me of the fact that beauty can involve symmetry. We look at a building that has some symmetry and we think, oh, that's a beautiful building or something like that. or like an old French garden where you have the walks they're just perfectly symmetrical. Everything's on the same side.
Ew,
And
French.
he destroys these lamps and destroys the waters, and so the symmetry's gone. And he thinks that maybe, impossibly, he thinks that destroying symmetry will destroy the beauty of the land, and it does to some extent. But the thing is that we can find beauty in things that are non-symmetrical as well. So, going from those French symmetrical gardens to like the more English romantic gardens where you have this beautiful walk and trees are just like, the willows are all hanging over the walks and everything. Those are beautiful as well. We don't need symmetry. It might be nice, but it's not needed. And so I think that's a big part of the redemption here. And even going from lamps, which, I mean, maybe these lamps weren't symmetrical, but I'll just assume that they were, to trees. Trees grow off in weird directions. They're not symmetrical, but they're still beautiful. And so there's something, it's I'm wondering if maybe there's an element of like Melkor thinking that, now I've got that symmetry gone. They'll never get beauty back. And then, the Valar show them wrong. So, might be part of it. I'm not sure.
They definitely do show him to be wrong. So not only, can the non-symmetrical thing be beautiful, but also the Valar are willing to leave the ruins alone because they feared to rend the earth again, as it says at the end of this paragraph that we're looking at. Afterwards, they feared to rend the earth again until they knew where the children of Iluvatar were dwelling, who were yet to come in a time that was yet hidden from the Valar. Because after all, we have to remember, like, this is the reason that they came to Middle Earth, right? They love the children. They're very eager to see the children awake in Arda. In the fact that they were willing, I think this is so interesting. They were willing to see their hard work completely marred and by Melkor, and have him leave his mark on these creations that they worked hard on in honor of Iluvatar. They were willing to see those things stay there in that broken condition, so to make it safe for the children to awake. It would be so easy, and I think this could be a temptation of a Vala like Aule, right? Who is so creative, and that's kind of his mark, is that he makes things. It would be easy for him to just go ahead and remix his part of the creation and actually end up, let's say he does something and it would actually end up crushing the elves right where they wake up or something like that. So the patience and passion for the true mission of making a place for the children to awake, I think is really admirable in this, that they were willing to live, to see these ruins sit until the children awake, was really stood out to me. They were willing to put up with the imperfect thing until the actual culmination of the mission was to come.
It's funny, I just thought they were cowards.
If Tulkas hadn't been taking a nap, something would have been different. But
taking my ball and going home.
He was busy icing his fists.
I'm just kidding, people. Don't send us hate mail. It's just a joke.
There's something interesting about light in this chapter, and light kind of is a substance. And the reason I mentioned that is because as I was reading, so the Valar leave Arda and they go to an island called Aman, and they erect a mountain range called the Pelori, and it says behind the Pelori, they were in their houses in a guarded land. So they take refuge for themselves away from that marred creation that Melkor has ruined. And it says, in that guarded land, the Valar gathered great store of light and all the fairest things that were saved from the ruin. What is a store of light? What could that mean?
It's like they just produce light. Like it's just part of who they are.
Or they have like an LED factory.
Yeah.
It's one or the other.
Yeah. They just have that glow,
This gave me a little bit of like the heavenly Jerusalem type vibe, where, it says the deathless dwelt there, and they're not faded nor withered, neither was there any stain upon flower in that land, nor any corruption or sickness in anything that lived, for the very stones and waters were hallowed. Definitely a heavenly Jerusalem type vibe for me, and everything that is light is good. That obviously seems to be a theme here, light versus darkness. So it's almost like another way of saying in it there was no darkness at all, is that they stored up light, even though they didn't yet have another source of light quite yet, because the lamps were destroyed. But that's really kind of where I was going when I was reading this. Who wants to start the spoiler alerts with the trees?
You can be the queen of spoilers.
Well, let me say I love, in the first, so this is like the third time reading through this chapter for me. I didn't pick up the first two times as much that Nienna. So Yavanna has this mound, right? That she's like, I guess, singing over, and, things are growing. But Nienna goes and cries, and her tears go into the mound. And then from that mound, the trees eventually come. And moving forward, I think that's so interesting how Tolkien keeps kind of weaving Nienna and grief and sorrow kind of into the story. That is also good, because the trees are good and they're the source of light.
They're epic.
But yeah.
I love the two trees. I won't beat around the bush about it. I think they're one of the.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
That was a good one, Lee.
See, I can be funny sometimes. I think they're one of the most. Even though this book is called the Silmarillion, I think you could easily make the two trees kind of the central image of this entire historical pre-Lord of the Rings thing, because so many of the things that happen in the later chapters all are related to the trees eventually. And there really will be spoilers, so I won't elaborate much more than that. But you would not have so many of the important elements of the later story in the Silmarillion without the two trees. So it's a very, very important fundamental piece of creation for Middle Earth as a whole, and I think they're really fascinating. It is interesting though to think of an entire world lit by trees that produce light. We know Tolkien loved trees, but man, that's a whole different level. Of course, these are trees in heaven, so we should expect them to be probably a little bit different than we would normally see in our backyard. Because after all this, so this island, this Aman, is also called Valinor later, and essentially is heaven in this story. The entire legendarium. So like the ring bearers, when they get on the ships at the Grey Havens, they're sailing off to Aman, to Valinor. And so Bilbo and Frodo and Gandalf, of course, Gandalf returns there. That's where he's from. And then eventually Sam all go. They go to heaven and they spend eternity with the Valar in Valinor. So So very much a heavenly atmosphere there, even though Nienna brings an amount of grief to the place, but
it's not a perfect representation.
Yeah. Well, and it's still in Middle Earth. It's still in Arda. It's an island, and it's harder to get to later in the story when the world changes, but it is still on the planet. Heaven is a place on Earth.
Well, and if you think about it, we wouldn't have access to heaven if it weren't for the suffering of Christ. So, we are kind of inextricably, tied to suffering in order to enter glory. And I think that's a little bit of what Tolkien's picking up here as well.
Yeah. Christ was no stranger to grief at all. So on the two trees, I know we talked a little bit about number one, J.R.R. Tolkien is very based, even for a papist, and I was especially entertained that the two trees they are a male and female tree, and I think there's a level of completeness that brings a certain orderly balance. That each tree has its own complementary stance, and there's a time as we talk about kind of how the phases of those trees pass in the course of a day. There's a time when they're both kind of waning, and then a time when they're both at their full strength, and then one will overtake from the other, which is I think was an interesting. Obviously, it's a mirroring of sort of the sun and the moon, right? But in tree form instead of a heavenly body form. But it does take on at that time where it talks about. I want to make sure I get the time right. Or get the reference right. Thus began the days of the bliss of Valinor, and thus began also the count of time. So a lot of people will talk in Tolkien nerdy terms. They'll talk about how like there's the years of the trees, or the years of the lamps, and time is counted differently based on which of those bodies is in, of course, and then. After the trees, when the sun and moon come into existence, then those are kind of the normal times. But I'm very much intrigued by
the significance of the passage of time.
Yes, that's a great phrase. Should have thought of that.
Yeah,
it is significant.
On it.
Zach was smiling that whole time. He was just waiting for it, but got to be quicker than that.
It was coming. I could see it.
Maybe he had to sneeze or something. So another question. So in comparison of these lighting bodies in Middle Earth, the description of how the trees light Arda is so much more detailed than what we got for the lamps. Does anybody have a particular idea why that would be?
I don't know. You get a sense of time moving, the waxing and waning of the different lights. You don't have that with the lamps. It was always bright. It was constant. It is different atmosphere altogether. You have the rise and fall of, all the silver light and then the gold light, the moon and the sun. But
even a flickering lamp is either on or off, right? Trees obviously, are change differently with seasons, right?
Another thing is, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be written from the elves. This is based on the elves' understanding of the past. They didn't see the lamps. They didn't know what the lamps were like, but they would have seen the trees. And so it could be that it's because of that. We have more information about stuff that was, around when historians were writing than, before we had a ton of historians around.
Yeah, the one thing that real Galadriel and Rings of Power Galadriel have in common is they both grew up around the trees in Valinor and got to see the light of the trees. It's the one thing those two characters have in common.
They were true to the lore.
I like to think that both consulted archivists at times as well.
Oh, we don't know if we've got information about the kings of men or not. Blah, 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 blah. Give me a break.
I wish you had opinions on Rings of Power, Lee.
Yeah,
it'd be nice to hear them sometime.
Yeah, I wish I cared about the show more.
It was worth watching just to know what Lee was mad about.
There was like a weekly rant, basically, while the first season was still on the air. Like there'd be a new rant every episode. It was just, I was as horrified of that show as I was when I watched the Dracula series on Netflix. Well, I watched the first episode, which was just awful. If you know at least the first half of the book. And incidentally, both of these series have the actor Morfydd Clark in them, and I think she's the one that ruined both of those things. It's all Morfydd's fault.
That's her name.
I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Morfyyd. So she's Welsh. Morfydd, maybe. I don't know. I'm American. I say it right. However I say it.
No, I wish I had like a chart for the trees, like the lighting sequence, because it took a while. I had to reread that a couple times. Like, all right, 7 hours peak, then a couple hours where they're kind of waning and waxing at the same time. But I couldn't do the math on that. That's supposed to be like a 24-hour period.
I think it's
because
12 hours.
Yeah, each day of the Valar in Aman contained 12 hours and ended with the second mingling of the lights, in which Laurelin was waning, but Telperion was waxing. So two days go by for them in the course of one Middle Earth day, I guess.
Well, and I had
in the time of the sun and moon. I should make that comparison.
Because I had read like a note. I didn't read it for myself, but it sounds like Valinor time is longer than Middle Earth. It was something like it was like a year in Valinor is 9.5 years, and Middle Earth. I made Lee run and get a reference. He's gonna go get something. He's gonna look it up.
Awesome.
We need the facts. We need our fact checker, Lee.
We need some more information about the significance of the passage of time here.
In Arda.
Sorry, talk amongst yourselves for a second. I own a copy of that, The Nature of Middle Earth, and I'm going to try to see if I can find something in there on the fly about tree time.
Tree time.
The significance of the passage of time.
The significance of the passage of trees.
The trees, man, the trees.
When I saw that it was 12 hours for a day, I was very confused because I would have thought that it was a longer scale and not a shorter scale for a day. It didn't make sense to me.
So this is what I'm
12
thinking.
hours.
I'm thinking it's like one tree peaks at 7 hours and then wanes And then once that one's almost waned, there's like the overlap of an hour or two. And then the other one waxes up to peak at 7 hours and then wanes. So there's like that period where they kind of overlap together. So it is like 24 hours because at one point they're both kind of like low at the same time for a couple hours. But then you've got Telperion and Laurelin like, oh, okay, Lee's got the...
Boy, do I have the goods for you. Look, this is why I make the big bucks, okay? So the very first chapter is called the Valian Year. So like the year of Valinor. So it says the yen, which is merely a mode of reckoning, has nothing to do with the life of the elves. In Aman, this depended on the years of the trees, or really on the days of the trees. In Middle-earth, on the cycles of growth, spring to spring, or Loar. In Middle-earth, one Loa aged an elf as much as a year of the trees, but these were in fact 10 times as long. A year of the trees had 1,000 days of 12 hours, so that equals 12,000 tree hours. A year of 365.25 days of 24 hours has 8,766 hours. Let me turn the page. Tree years have 87,660. If 12,000 tree hours equals 10 Middle-earth years, each tree hour equals about 7.3 sun hours, equals 7 hours and 18 seconds. How are we to arrange for the sun and moon? Elves do not know how Arda was established or the companions of Anar made of their companies, for it is to the life of Arda, not Ea, which they are bound in their love for Arda, though they may consider the matter in having amazing sight. They can see in the heavens things we cannot, which accounts for their, I think, more exact reckoning of time. And then again for time, it says there are 12 tree hours in each Valian day, 144 days in each Valian year. But each Valian year equals 144 mortal years. Therefore, one Valian day equals one mortal year. And one tree hour equals approximately one mortal month, which is interesting. These are two different.
That to me like I'm 5.
So these are two different texts that are accounting for time in Valinor. So what they've done is that they're using those hours that are set out here and stacking them up into years, and then comparison between the two. So there's a you're comparing tree years in Valinor with days of the sun and moon in the later age. So time actually passes slower in Valinor, to the tune of a year in Valinor under the trees equals 144 years in what they call mortal years, or years in Middle Earth. So that's a significant drag in time. And then of course the aging of elves, it kind of corresponds to that too, because after all, they are they're, and as our chapter says today, they're more like in character to the Valar, and so I think they have more. Probably especially for the elves that grew up in Valinor, their age is more determined by the Valian year than the mortal years that come with living in Middle Earth. Anyway, that's what I take away from that bit of information. But I highly recommend The Nature of Middle Earth, which is a book put together by Karl Hofstetter. I believe it's also in this book. I haven't finished it yet, but this book also references that there were dancing bears on Numenor, which I think is just absolutely delightful.
Interesting.
Numenor was just an isle of delights.
Those are the best kinds of bears.
It's better when they dance instead of maul you.
Thank you for laughing, Maddie.
If only those kids that Elisha sicked the bears on were dancing bears instead of she bears. That'd have been great.
I don't know why those are exclusive.
Beat Battlestar Galactica.
Have
You
y'all
think
ever seen like Fantasia,
No,
like the Disney?
I'm straight.
Hated Fantasia.
Well, like the hippos, like how they dance, like with tutus.
Okay.
That's kind of what
Yes.
I'm envisioning with the bears, like bears dancing with tutus.
Oh man.
We digress very, very far.
What happened?
Nick's blowing his nose.
I was trying to do it like subtly, you know.
I loved it. I was already cracking up at your
But-
message, so it didn't matter.
Well, I didn't want to blow my nose and disrupt and distract, but I ended up doing it anyway, so that's fine.